In 1898, during an era when steamships regularly got lost in dense North Atlantic fog, the world's major shipping firms entered into an unprecedented compact. They established invisible lanes across the ocean, separating eastbound and westbound vessels into dedicated corridors to avoid catastrophic shipwrecks. The strategy proved successful. Ships that once drifted aimlessly across 3,000 nautical miles of open water were now restricted to fixed paths adjusted seasonally for ice conditions and currents. Deviating from these lanes invited disaster, yet the system endured for decades. Consequently, crossing the Atlantic for over a century has meant adhering to routes mapped out by others. Just as ships did, roughly 2,000 flights daily continue to funnel through narrow aerial corridors that shift every 12 hours based on high-altitude wind currents most travelers never realize exist. However, in March 2019, a network of 66 satellites activated space-based ADS-B surveillance. For the first time in 6 decades, air traffic controllers gained the ability to track every aircraft over the open ocean in near real time. This innovation does not merely upgrade the legacy system, it renders it completely obsolete. Yet, despite this network being operational for over 6 years, the invisible highways remain in use. Airlines continue to fly them, and controllers still issue updated tracks twice every day. If satellite technology has solved the tracking issue, why are these corridors becoming more hazardous rather than safer? To understand why thousands of daily flights still line up in narrow Atlantic corridors, one must look at the single critical limitation that restricted oceanic aviation for decades. Radar cannot see beyond roughly 200 miles from the coastline. Past that point, aircraft completely vanish from controller displays. Far from a minor technical gap, this affects the busiest oceanic airspace on Earth, which handles about 580,000 flights annually between Europe and North America. During peak summer periods, controllers at Scotland's Shanwick Oceanic Control and Canada's Gander Oceanic Control must separate aircraft across millions of square miles of open sea without ever visually tracking them. The physics offered no leeway. Operating without radar, controllers depended entirely on periodic pilot position reports sent every few minutes. To prevent mid-air collisions in this blind zone, separation buffers were kept significantly wider than standard aviation metrics. Because of these large buffers, the sky could accommodate only a limited number of aircraft at any specific altitude. This is where the jet stream becomes a major factor. As a narrow band of high-altitude wind moving west to east at speeds sometimes topping 200 miles per hour, it represents the most powerful economic driver in transatlantic flight. An eastbound flight utilizing the jet stream from New York to London can trim 90 minutes off its travel time, whereas a westbound flight battling it head-on can burn thousands of dollars in extra fuel. To adapt, aviation regulators introduced the North Atlantic Organized Track System in 1965. This daily framework of virtual highways is mapped out to route as many aircraft as possible through the most advantageous winds. Eastbound tracks are designated for overnight journeys entering the system between 0100 and 0800 UTC, while westbound tracks handle daytime return flights crossing the 30 degrees west boundary between 1130 and 1900 UTC. The tracks are redesigned every 12 hours using current jet stream data. The setup was highly organized. Even though planes couldn't be seen, they were entirely predictable. Controllers knew precisely where each aircraft was supposed to be, and airlines saved millions by riding tailwinds. The compromise was a loss of freedom, forcing every aircraft onto the same narrow corridors stacked between flight levels FL 340 and FL 400, regardless of pilot preference. The true constraint was not the wind itself, but informational darkness, the complete inability to pinpoint an aircraft's exact real-time coordinates over the ocean. With Gander managing the western portion of the Atlantic and Shanwick handling the eastern side, their shared border sat at 30 degrees west longitude. Together, they supervised a highly complex airspace using procedural control, a methodology virtually unchanged since the 1960s. Pilots transmitted position updates via voice over HF radio, a medium plagued by static, poor reception, and garbled audio. Controllers manually logged these coordinates on paper strips or early computer interfaces, mentally calculating where each plane would be 10 or 15 minutes into the future. Conflicts were managed via altitude adjustments and time-based spacing. Flights securing the optimal tracks capitalized on tailwinds and conserved fuel, while less fortunate flights were relegated to less efficient altitudes or routes. This created a competitive lottery where British Airways might secure track Alpha at flight level 380 with a 180-knot tailwind, while United was relegated to track Charlie at flight level 340 with only a 120-knot tailwind. The system successfully prevented collisions, but it placed heavy artificial limits on airspace capacity and operational efficiency. The paradigm shifted on March 27, 2019, when surveillance technology firm Aviation activated its space-based ADS-B system via the Iridium NEXT constellation of 66 low Earth orbit satellites. For the first time, Gander and Shanwick controllers could continuously monitor every properly equipped aircraft over the North Atlantic every few seconds, rather than relying on 10-minute HF radio updates. The operational impacts were immediate. Separation standards designed for a blind environment were reduced laterally and longitudinally, boosting airspace capacity and generating £19 million in annual fuel savings, according to NATS. The ultimate objective, however, was dismantling the track system entirely. In March 2021, NATS and NAV Canada took the significant step of abolishing organized tracks below flight level 330. Aircraft cruising above 25,000 feet were granted the freedom to fly custom, optimized routes outside the legacy highway system, a concept known as free route airspace. The initial data validated this approach. Within the first 3 months of Avion's implementation, 31,700 flights utilized optimized speeds and altitudes, saving substantial fuel per crossing. System-wide, annual savings reached roughly 45,000 tons of CO2 and £19 million in fuel costs. By February 2026, Flight Radar 24 fully integrated Avion's satellite tracking with its terrestrial receivers, eliminating the remaining blind spots across global flight paths. Yet the true importance of space-based ADS-B goes beyond fuel economy and carbon reductions. It lies in the disruption of a 60-year-old operating model that generations of pilots were trained to navigate. The organized track system functioned not just as a routing tool, but as a foundational mental model. Pilots understood Atlantic crossings because the underlying protocols had remained steady since the 1960s, obtaining oceanic clearance via voice, reading it back, and verifying the track, flight level, and Mach number. It was a familiar, safe ritual. Late in 2024, authorities began replacing these verbal clearances with automated text messages delivered via CPDLC, Controller Pilot Data Link Communications. Intended to boost efficiency, the transition instead brought complications. The North Atlantic Central Monitoring Agency documented 475 lateral navigation errors within the Gander region in 2025, marking a stark 71% surge over the prior year. Pilots frequently misread the automated transmissions, mistakenly assuming a basic system acknowledgement indicated approval for a requested speed or altitude change. Flight crews inputted incorrect data into flight management computers, causing aircraft to drift off course without immediate detection. This growing hazard was highlighted by a severe near-miss in June 2025. Approximately 160 nautical miles northeast of Gander, a controller inadvertently sent a data link instruction clearing a United Airlines Boeing 777 to ascend to flight level 360. Crucially, a FedEx Boeing 777 was already flying at flight level 350 directly along the United Jet's flight path. Though the controller spotted the mistake and issued a verbal order to halt the climb, the United aircraft was already ascending. The flight crew received a TCAS alert, the onboard final resort collision avoidance system, and immediately dove. The vertical gap between the two wide-body jets shrank to a mere 500 feet, which is half of the mandatory minimum safety margin, averting a major disaster by mere seconds. By May 2025, Gander was forced to temporarily return to VHF voice communications for all route alterations, acknowledging that automated systems were rolling out faster than human operators could safely adapt. This trend seems contradictory. The technology functions as intended, satellites maintain constant visibility, safety buffers have been reduced, and environmental and fuel metrics show clear benefits. Yet, the operational transition is generating elevated risks. The paradox clears up when you recognize that the organized track system was primarily a tool for predictability. When 2,000 aircraft fly the identical ocean nightly along a small set of predefined tracks, every operator knows the parameters. Pilots know what to anticipate, and controllers know where to focus. The rigid nature of the legacy system was its primary safety feature. Free routing removes that baseline predictability. When every aircraft follows its own tailored trajectory, controllers must monitor 2,000 distinct flight paths rather than 6 or 8 structured tracks. Their operational focus must pivot from managing structured lanes to detecting conflicts across an open expanse. While AI-backed algorithms and continuous satellite tracking make this manageable in theory, the human element, pilots adapting to unfamiliar messaging protocols and controllers managing altered workflows, remains the core bottleneck. Furthermore, the physical environment is growing less stable. University of Reading research indicates that severe clear air turbulence over the North Atlantic has surged by 55% since 1979. The jet stream that gives the track system its economic worth is turning more volatile and unpredictable due to a warming climate. Thus, the invisible highway is growing rougher right as the tools to abandon it are deployed. In March 2025, ICAO took another step indicating the future direction of aviation by officially decommissioning the Blue Spruce routes. These historic backup tracks running through Greenland and Iceland had served as critical redundancies for aircraft with basic navigation gear since the early days of transatlantic flight. Their quiet removal was highly symbolic. It signaled that the North Atlantic is no longer configured for planes lacking precision navigation capabilities. Any aircraft crossing the ocean today must be outfitted with advanced GPS and modern surveillance hardware. The era of manual procedural navigation, paper tracking strips, and HF radio communications is effectively over. The organized track system continues to be published twice a day, adjusting alongside the jet stream, but its ultimate trajectory is clear. Both NATS and NAV Canada have declared their long-term goal to fully dissolve the tracking architecture, even during peak traffic windows. The invisible highway system that guided millions of flights along identical corridors for 6 decades is being taken apart piece by piece. When the final organized track is deleted from daily aviation publications, it will conclude an operational era that traced its roots back to steamships navigating through coastal fog. More than 2,000 flights will continue to transit the Atlantic daily, chasing tailwinds eastbound and avoiding them westbound. They will depart from and arrive at the same hubs, but every plane will map its own unique path, calculated by algorithms, monitored by satellite networks, and separated by technologies that did not exist a decade ago. The question is no longer whether these invisible highways will fade away. They are already actively dissolving. The real question is whether the broader aviation infrastructure, the pilots, controllers, and regulatory frameworks designed for an older era, is keeping pace.